Welcome to the South-South Dialogue on Sustainability. My name is Tsui, Jade, Margaret from Southwest University and Global University for Sustainability. We provide Portuguese, English, and Chinese simultaneous interpretation. You can find a group icon of interpretation at the bottom of your computer screen. We would like to thank the interpreters, Julia Husty Giovanni, Batala, Liang Yin, and He Xuan. Apart from Zoom webinar, we also do live streaming on Bilibili, which is a very popular social media platform in China. There are thousands of young followers who are interested in world politics and eager to learn alternative thoughts and experience. In the past 3 years, we organized several lecture series: Venezuela in Struggles, Colonial Past, a Revolutionary Legacy and Community Regeneration, Experience with Indigenous Communities in Chiapas, Cosmovision and Sustainability, and African People's Struggles for Liberation. All videos are recorded and uploaded to the website of Global University. I typed the video links in the chat room. Now we are organizing the lecture series of Constructing Alternative Paradigms in Brazil. It is co-organized by Global University for Sustainability, CCRD-CS, Lingnan University, PPGPS, Federal University of Espírito Santo, Institute for Rural Revitalization Strategy, Southwest University, and Asian Regional Exchange for New Alternatives. This lecture series by Brazilian scholars and activists will explore the construction of alternative paradigms in Brazil and Latin America. The topics include Brazilian political economy, liberation theology, participatory budgeting, liberation pedagogy, food sovereignty, agroecology, climate justice, rainforest alliance, community currency, Latin American integration, among others. We have already organized 3 lectures about the dependency of Brazilian economy, agrarian question, food sovereignty, agroecology, women participation in social change in Brazil. I will type the website of the Brazil lectures in the chat room, in which you can find the video links of the previous lectures. Tonight, we have lecture 4, Amazonia Horizons, Resistance and Indigenous Protagonism. Let me introduce the first speaker, Rosane G. Fátima Fernandes. Rosane is a pedagogist. She has Master of Laws and Doctor in Social Anthropology from the Federal University of Pará. She is one of the founders and vice president of the Association of Indigenous Teachers of the South and Southeast of Pará. She also coordinates the Indigenous School Education Working Group of the Regional Forum of Field Education. And she is also an educator linked to the Municipal Secretariat of Education of Marabá, Pará in Brazil. Rosane cannot join us on Zoom, but she sent us a video of her presentation.
Olá, meu nome é Rosane Fernandes, eu sou cangangue. Quero primeiro
Rosane, I'd like first of all to thank you very much for having me today and be part of this talk that was named Horizon in the Amazon Resistance and Indigenous Protagonism. It's found
uma conversa, né, que vem sendo realizada
is being done about
paradigmas
sustainability,
alternativos,
building alternatives paradigms in Brazil. I'd like to thank especially Maísa, that was the person that got in touch with me. I'd like to say thank you, Cacique, Kadia, Bruno, and Fernando, that will also participate with me today, and we will be part of this round table, and also Tsui or Jade. I don't know if I have pronounced her name correctly, because difficulties in my agenda, I was not able to participate
colegas de mesa,
because I had other I had other things in my agenda today, so we're going to listen to my recorded video. I am an educator, pedagogue. I also studied anthropology and laws in the Federal University of Pará, anthropologist. I am an indigenous person. I'm a woman Kaingangi, anthropologist and educator. I live in Amazon for 2 decades. I work with the school education. That's my area in which I develop activities. Also, my professional activities I developed. I have been working especially with the mobilization with the indigenous community in the southeast region of Pará. Today, after Marabá, that's where I'm speaking from. That's a main city here in the region. Here in the southeast, we have roughly 15 people, indigenous people. They're very close of my Maria indigenous tribe. I built my papers, my article about QTG, that's Simon Hay, family connections, social connections, and also cultural connections. I have developed many activities in the educational field, producing didactic material, educational material with other people from the region, Abaeté, Paraquiná, Xigrim, Catete region as well, also with my Maria area. She's talking about the names of the tribes where she is, and we are proposing to the government to prepare educational policies, having educational materials that represent us, and also they represent this school education committed to the societies of the different populations here, talking about this invitation about what happens in Amazon. It's a way to talk about the different possibilities. That's the reason why I'm talking about the people, talking about 9 states that form not only Amazon, but also Pan-Amazon that goes beyond Brazilian borders. And that's a region that is characterized especially by the presence of hundreds of traditional people, including indigenous people. In the Pará state, we are more than 50 people. Having a political organizational representativeness is very diverse. We are also organized in different representations, legal representations as well, through indigenous associations, communities that are represented either by our state organization, just the Federation of Indigenous People in the state of Pará, that form COAB. That's the coordination of indigenous organization in the Brazilian Amazon. And COAB, of course, just as other organizations in the region, they are part of a PB. That's the articulation of Brazilian people in Brazil, is led by Sonia Guajajara, that currently is the Minister of Indigenous People in Brazil. We're talking about playing a key role, and we are finalizing what happened. The president of Brazil, former Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, he really tried to break apart what I say, the indigenous movement. In the 4 years, there was a terrible government by former Brazilian president Bolsonaro. There were many difficulties that we already had overcome before, such as integration, learning things, exploitation of indigenous lands. In our Brazilian Constitution of 1880, we guaranteed that these are things that are outdated, that we understood that they resumed the attacks against our territories, and also the indigenous identity, the idea to integrate, to make us part of the Brazilian culture. Since where there was the invasion of the Portuguese people in Brazil, we, the indigenous people in Brazil, that period, that time, we were roughly more than 1,000 people, having an estimated population of 8 million people living in this territory that was named and invented as Brazil, as an idea or talking, because we had in Brazil a wood that is called Brazil. It has a red color. That's the reason why we gained with this name, or we were named Brazil, because we are indigenous. We are Kaingangi, Carajás, Guarani, we are Venticatejê. We're different amongst ourselves, but we have an identity, a national identity that are our own identity of our people, but also we are Brazilians. That's the reason why an anthropologist is going to talk about that. He's a teacher in the university here and talking about the process of making us become citizen. Today, we have two citizenship. We have the possibility of produce good things that avoid the different identities in Brazil, because we are different amongst ourselves. We're different from the Brazilian nationality. We have two citizenship, but we live in different places. But it's important that we think about historic process to erase, to silence these ethnic identities through educational processes that began in Brazil with the religious priests, and they were trying to somehow give a mark in their education, these integrational policies of genocide, slavery, integration of the indigenous people in the national identity, having different clothing. We can assert that indigenous people land, they have always been a core issue for us. Also, when we talk about indigenous labor, education centered in the indigenous people, having the objective to form this labor for the indigenous people. We, in the previous century, we have the STE. That's a way to educate people. That was the first agency in Brazil designed to design indigenous subjects responsible for educational processes. And somehow, to soothe us, Manuela Carreiro da Silva is a Brazilian anthropologist. She's going to talk about this category, how to make us meek, meaning that along these 500 years of occupation by the Portuguese, with these colonialist policies, we are going to observe that many subjects, they were somehow taken on. Can be in the first moment, if we were compared with animals, that we are part of this Brazilian reaction, because they believed that we indigenous people didn't have a soul. We wanted to be part of this human civilization, and that has happened in different manners, that it should be part of this Brazilian context. These borders that they were limited or designed in the 70s, for example, there was a process that was called a way to put us together. There were lots of efforts that organized such Brazilian policies at that time, an integration that they called the rest of Brazil, this idea that Amazon needed to be occupied, and without people, without land, this expansion policy, this occupation, invasion of our territories, that in the way of this wrong way of territorial occupation, did not consider that at that time in Brazil, there were more than 100 years of people that lived here already. And these people, they were considered as a disturbance for opening roads. And these people were systematically taken out of their traditional territories against their will. They did not consider that these people, they were part of their territories. And this creation of the named indigenous park, or also when they have taken the Atanquicatengê, they were taken out of these areas where they lived traditionally. Today, there is a hydro plant there, and also they took Chiquim people by the company Vale do Rio Doce. Now it's a private company, and so there were many impacts to these people. They were transferred in a mandatory manner by the Brazilian state to today is a indigenous land that is called Maria Indigenous Land. They were taken out in a mandatory manner. Today, what is named City Land, that's a city in the state of Maranhão, that just as that per Cartagena, they occupied the area of the Tocantins River. They were sent to a very, very small piece of land in compared to the land that they occupied before. Well, the different manner of sending these people to different lands show that they believe that indigenous people that represent that they should taken out, that should be removed, that they should be civilized. Just because of this military dictatorship, that lots of violence they were committed against the Brazilian people. Not only these compulsory removals of the people, indigenous people, there was what we call Figueiredo report. They tried to take us out, and through this truth report, these crimes they have been investigated again, because there were lots of crimes against the Brazilian peoples. And during the dictatorship, all these crimes, they killed roughly 8,000 indigenous people. Not only that, Figueiredo report shows that this, in addition to the tortures that were performed against us, they were not investigated at that time. The name is of this investigation was reported by Figueiredo, and lots of crimes that were committed against us.
Acts of extreme violence, like crucifixion. That's the case of a woman who had disobeyed instructions by the state agent. So this kind of policy also implied the contamination of these people by diseases on purpose that happened in different regions of the country, not only in the Amazon region. In the south of Brazil, also we saw attacks against indigenous populations there, against the Guarani Caingangue. People were hired who were killers and who were meant to capture indigenous people happened also at that time. Poisoning entire communities. They distributed poisoned sugar to the communities. There was the conflict around mining. All the violent action that we see were part of a policy against our bodies and our territory. During the administration of President Bolsonaro, we have seen the implementation of many bills promoted by the agribusiness lobby. This group is the group that is responsible for most of the attacks against indigenous rights. The group that's trying to approve legislation to make possible and to make legal the mining in indigenous land that today is illegal in our territories and other types of attacks. And the indigenous people in the Amazon and across Brazil, indigenous people are fighting this. It's important to say that the protagonism of indigenous people is being carried on through the coordination of indigenous movements at many levels. So we are coordinated across regions to resist illegal mining and illegal logging. And over the past 4 years, we have been seeing how the state agencies that are responsible for indigenous rights have been hijacked by the Bolsonaro administration to attack indigenous rights. It was a catastrophe, and many anthropologists and historians have called it a catastrophe. I mean, the past 400 years, 500 years, we hope to overcome that. And we see today that we have an indigenous ministry that was created by the Lula administration. We have there Sonia Guajajara, who is a very well-prepared person to play that role. The National Indigenous Foundation that had been hijacked in the Bolsonaro administration. Today, we have Joênia Wapichana, an indigenous woman who was a federal deputy before that, and she is a lawyer. She now is the first indigenous president of the national agency that is responsible for indigenous people. It's the first time an indigenous woman plays that role. In the same way, the indigenous healthcare agency is coordinated by an indigenous person. So there's a significant change since the election of President Lula. We must know that great challenges are ahead of us, but the indigenous peoples in the Amazonian region, we are organized, we are present in the universities, and there is a law, a national law that creates the possibility for differentiated access for indigenous peoples in the university to be able to have people getting education, high-level education in any areas they are interested, like law, healthcare, education, of the people who will be acting in our territory. It's important to say that indigenous resistance in Brazil happens in many ways. In the territories, in terms of defending the recognition of indigenous land, as we see in Mato Grosso do Sul, there are people like the Terena, the Guarani Kaiowá, who are reclaiming the land they have lost and fighting for the legal recognition of their right to that land. That is done through indigenous organizations that have a national dialogue. And every year in the month of April, we have been organizing what we call the Terra Livre Free Land Camp. The indigenous women's movement is also growing, but we have many challenges yet. Being in the universities as students, as professors, now with master's degrees, with PhD degrees, we can talk about the dynamics of the indigenous culture. People who are indigenous who live in the cities, in the universities, and also in spaces of power, we can have a voice there. We must also denounce structural racism as an obstacle to indigenous protagonism, as many of the decision-making spaces are a privilege of white people in the history of the country. We also have to create more spaces for dialogue with the presence of indigenous people, as there are many epistemologies, many systems of knowledge, and they must interact in an intercultural way across epistemes. And we must think of the future of the Amazonian region with the Amazonian people. We are confronting a genocide, the genocide policy of the Brazilian state. We are resisting, and today we are part of the making of the state policies. So it's important to say that indigenous protagonism must be built with the voices and the struggles of the indigenous movement. I would like to thank you for this invitation. I hope to have contributed to the debate, and I will be here to contribute further anytime you need. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you very much. And before we invite the second speaker, let's watch a trailer of a documentary about indigenous struggle in today Brazil, Stepping Softly on the Earth, which is directed by Marcos Colon.
A gente só existe porque a terra deixa a gente viver. Ela dá vida pra gente. Não tem outra coisa que dá vida. É por isso que a gente chama ela de Mãe Terra.
E meu pai dizia para mim, tu não pode morrer. Tu tem que escapar. Se quiserem matar, deixa matar teus irmãos. Tu foge para te contar a história.
O nosso coração chora, a nossa mente se entristece de nós ver a nossa floresta dormir em pé e amanhecer deitado, destruído. Porque o grande empreendimento, eles trabalham noite e dia para nós nos derrotar.
Porque nós tínhamos nome indígena e quando nós fomos se registrar em 79, o cartório não aceitou o nosso nome indígena, porque nós não era cristão, nós não era ser desse Brasil.
Modernidad es sinónimo de arruinamiento social. No es los asesinatos, los feminicidios, la contaminación, no es parte aislada de un mal desarrollo, sino es lo que el desarrollo produce. El desarrollo produce riqueza material para unos pocos y ruina total para el resto.
A pandemia pode matar alguns, mas esse equívoco pode matar todo mundo. Esse erro de achar que a gente pode perpetuar uma maneira de estar no mundo comendo o mundo. Da mesma maneira que você derruba uma montanha e produz minério, e produz ferro e aço, você produz guerra e mata a gente. É escolha. A gente podia escolher outra coisa. A gente podia escolher, por exemplo, não sair por aí matando tudo.
Se tu não sair dessa terra, Paiaré, nós vamos amarrar tu, Paiaré, de cima do avião, jogar a tua família no meio do rio, pros peixes comer vocês. Nós vamos matar vocês, Paiaré. Essa terra não é tua, meu pai disse, essa terra é minha.
poderá impedir que essa tragédia seja irreversível para os povos originários e para a vida planetária.
O futuro é ancestral. Ele é tudo que já existiu. Ele não é o que está lá em algum lugar. Ele é o que está aqui.
It is our great honor to invite Katia Akatitaja, one of the indigenous leaders in the documentary, to be the second speaker. Let me introduce Katia. I hope, please forgive me if I pronounce the names wrongly. Tongkat Akatataji is the indigenous name of Katia Selenit da Costa Vardanisan, Kasia do Povo Akatikategi, which means hawk of the mountain. She is the daughter of Hamunda and Hopragia Ronoya Jopikiti Perai, a historical indigenous leader in the Amazon who fought against the forced displacement of her people due to the construction of the Tsui hydroelectric plant. Katia calls herself a survivor of the Holocaust of the military dictatorship in the Amazon and the construction of a dam, as she was forced to leave her territory to live with the extreme violence of the Brazilian army and to adapt along with the Pacataji and Catataji peoples to the Mara Maria indigenous land, where their community was also displaced. Today, Katia lives on a land crossed by a road, 2 power lines, a very very road, and threatened by invasion by lodger. This adversity never prevented the chief from fighting or defending the unity of her people in the indigenous struggle. In addition to leading these struggles, she organized the implementation of agroforestry systems, fish tanks, various streams, and the collection of Brazil nuts in the indigenous land. I hope Katia will teach us how to pronounce the name correctly. Thank you very much, please.
Good morning to you all. I'd like to thank you for the invitation, to thank you all for this invitation. I will talk a little bit about our life and our connection to nature. I will talk about the territory, the culture. And as you have seen in the video, the great impact that my people suffered. My name, Katia Stileni, is my white name. My indigenous name is Tonkire Akrati Kateje. My father chose me to be the chief, although in our culture, women could not be leading the people. They did not have that opportunity. They could not be leaders because it was not part of the culture. But my father, Payare, he broke the protocol and he named me a woman as chief. And after me, other women came, and I am very honored. I feel even stronger to see these other women taking the opportunities of being chief. Today we have the 4 women chiefs in our land. We have opened doors for the Kayapo Shikrin, for the Kayapo and the Shikrin people to choose women as their leaders. So I feel that we have broke a barrier through my father, Payare, who has been a great leader with an extraordinary vision, and he has always taught me to fight for my people and for our autonomy, using the territory, not letting them destroy the territory, and knowing how to create value from what we have through extractivism of nuts, of acai fruit, defending the life of our rivers and our fish. So I say that my university is the ancestral university of my grandfathers and grandmothers. Many of them have passed away, but some of them, my ancestors, are still alive. Rosani, I want to congratulate Rosani for their work. She's a great inspiration for me, with her intelligence, with how she defends, as an indigenous woman, she defends the indigenous people, not one people, but all of them. And I feel very much represented by what Rosani said. And I'm here to share a little bit of my work and my struggle, and I go on fighting. I always say I did not have a childhood because my childhood was about fighting. My father prepared me for his death. He could be killed at any time, and he prepared me. I had my younger brothers and sisters, but since the beginning, since I was very young, I had to take the lead and I had to defend my father and my mother. I told my father, if they kill you, we are going to kill them. And he told me that was not right. And he have been working with me since the beginning. I had time that he dedicated to teach me how to defend myself, because we were in a time of war. We were a very rich people, and today we are a poor people, and we have to start from scratch again. We have been a very rich people. We had an abundance of fruit, of fish, of nuts, an intact territory, and that was our capital, the green resource that we have and we could work with. But later, the Brazilian state came telling us that we had to sell the nuts. We worked a lot and we did not get any money. And when the new agency came, the indigenous people became slaves.
And 90, that it's the school that is part of our tribe with lots of struggle. I think in 91, 92, that the school started to operate here, that we started studying, but our main concern was to how to increase the number of the people. That's what we tried to do. We put together the 3 people, so together with my Maria, because at that time we were being killed. I think it was a massacre during the dictatorship. Lots of people died. As Rosani has said, my people, they were contaminating more and more, and they started dying, and people started to run away of this place to survive. That's when COVID started. Lots of people died. I think we were threatened that they were going to poison our food, our water, to bomb our land in the midst of ourselves, to hide us as students, to throw from the top plane. It was really a psychological torture, was very complicated. Needless to say that we couldn't say our language. We were somehow obliged to forget our language because there was a code that they could not understand. The first thing that they tried to kill was the people, the culture, the language. That's when our people used to say, now we're going to lose our land because we can no longer speak our language. Then came the priests, the churches, they started teaching Portuguese to us. We started studying Portuguese. My father used to say that we have to maintain our language silently and learn how to speak Portuguese and also understand what they wanted from us. After that, we understood that they wanted was our territory, our land. They said that was to have a larger city, and where they constructed a dam there, also electricity area. They destroyed our land, our tribe. If we didn't leave our home, we were going to be dead. So that machine destroyed everything there, and my people had to run away through swimming, going to different places, because it was a massacre that happened in our land. I cannot forget that. I cannot forget the despair that we felt. And when they destroyed my land, we are very angry because of that. If we understood, if we had laws in Brazil, we wouldn't have died. Our land would be there, and they occupy our lands. Farmers, they occupy our lands. They make lots of money in this city of Tukuri, live in our land and occupy our land. We cannot live there. It's our land, but the farmers, they occupy our lands. Farmers, they are living there. There are factories. There are lots of things. We had more than 70,000 hectares. My Maria, we have 68 hectares, and there was bigger because we traveled from Tucuruí to other cities, and our land was limitless, you know, with lots of struggle. My father, he started to recover the land and looks for justice. The justice was very low, very slow. After many years that we got the land back, this electricity company was in that place. My father was like, you know, a small ant, and this company was like an elephant. You will never be able to win against this company. This company is very big. It's a state-owned company. You are not going to win from this company. You're crazy. But Eletronorte gave money to my dad, offering house, trucks, lorries. They have invested 52 million in our land because my father used to say, that is our land. Is not, we don't need money because money, you lose the money, but the land is there forever. He used to say that our land was the money. The money was the capital. The money was like an epidemic. And if he came to live in the city, he would be contaminated, as we are today, very much contaminated. Today, there are social inequalities amongst ourselves. There is a bargaining power. We are not working together anymore. There is a division in the people because of the white capitalism. My father used to say that as well. When we moved into this Mãe Maria land, there were people from my people that moved together with us, and then the 65 other people, 82, the family of my dad. He was nearly killed. He was attacked, but he was able to escape. It was really a big suffering for us. We had to leave behind the place where we were born, we were raised there, to live in a different place, trying to adjust to this new land. It took us a long time. We suffered a lot because this place was very different from the place where we are now. There, you could choose the fish that you're going to eat. Maybe when we hunt, we also could choose the meat that we had. There was really abundance of possibilities for us. There was no river. For example, we live along the rivers, and today we no longer have a river. We fish to survive. We lived from the fishing, from the roots, from hunting, from the territory. That's our father, our mother. That's who created our ancestors. Since we were young, we understand it like that. When we have a big tree and this tree is cut, when they destroy these woodcutters, they destroy our land and cut the trees, he's destroying ourselves as well, because that's where we take our money. And it's very complicated how to understand our thinking, the intimacy that we have with the land, this knowledge that we have. When the climate affects our territories, we feel together with the climate because we know that there were changes. This year, we went through lots of changes, climate change that is making us suffer a lot. Sometimes we could pick the fruits of the trees here. Now we don't have that anymore. The territories is bleeding, is crying, and we are suffering and crying together with the suffering of these territories. How we maintain ourselves is part of living in these territories, the place that we know where we live. We live from the food here. We live from our green drugstore. That's where we have the knowledge, where we talk with the birds. We receive our messages through the birds, through the forest. It's very complicated. It's very complicated when scientists come here and try to understand what we live. We defend the nature. Indigenous people, they are here for many, many years, more than 500 years, 10,000 years, we live here as well. We have this knowledge. It's very complicated when we scientists or people try to understand what we live here. I would like people to respect our vision of the world, our decision, as Rosani said, not even the state respect us. They say that the state wants to create Pan-Amazon, BioLife, BioAmazon. But what I say, well, why is the state so good to us? Because only now. Why there wasn't any justice towards us? What is the people doing to us? Where is the justice from Brazil? Where are the laws? I talk to MPS sometimes. The only law that we know that is still in place and exists is FUNAI is also having problems as well. We expect with Lula government, things might get stronger, but we are in a hurry. 4 years that we are running, trying to find a solution to speed up what we're going through. It is an opportunity, a single opportunity to make a change. Indigenous people, when we are going to talk to us, nobody can talk to us that want to talk with our way, that we are the ones that feel the pain. Nobody should talk through us. Nobody knows what I feel. Nobody knows about how concerned I am to prepare leadership. I'm concerned about that. I always say that my struggle will remain. What I'm feeling, the knowledge that I'm conveying from generation to generation, talking about the importance of our sustainable project. What I say is that we can live only from the land. The money from Vale did not bring wealth. It has brought poverty for us. It has brought greedy through people. I think that not only people here has brought conditions, diseases, lots of people with high cholesterol, people that have bladder issues as well, so many conditions, so many diseases, people dying very young, and we observe that who is helping us are the elderly, because of the food that we eat. They have not changed the diet. The diet is still the same. It's hunting. They do not eat oil, for example, do not drink soft drinks. They have a different diet. That's why we say about a different diet, different studies, because we are different people. It's not because we do not deserve the better. We are people that deserve respect And I think that the intelligence, the knowledge is amongst the traditional people. We are now in the week of the indigenous people. Before, for us, it was a party day. We were happy because of today. Today, we are trying to find a strategy because we are there. We want to throw the arrow. We are preparing ourselves to dance, to play, but we don't have peace anymore. We are always concerned with that because the technology invaded our space. Internet, for example, has invaded our place. We're not going to go back to what had before. We are no longer eating our food as we ate before. We want to have intelligence and add value. The two cultures should work together, indigenous people and also the white culture, so we can understand what is happening to us. Mainly when you talk about Amazon, when you talk about the rights, when we talk about the traditional product, when you talk about green pharmacy, when you talk about our project today, we, as we have always said, that indigenous people need to study, indigenous people should look for knowledge. We need to be more skilled, but never forgetting our identity, is strengthening our identity. In my school, that's my traditional school in which I am now, the state government does not consider my school as a school because it's an indigenous school. We want to have freedom. We want to be free. We don't want to feel caught in a school with four walls. That's freedom. That's learning. That's culture. That's science. That's where we feel good and we're not respected by our people. We still are feeling this psychological dictatorship. That's what we are living today. I say today that I'm a strong woman. I get inspired and I convey this inspiration for the young people, for women. We should have this spirit of not being afraid, not to blame the companies for what is happening towards us, to know what is the territory, how we can be protected as well, how to protect our lands. And that's where we were raised. That's where we're going to raise our kids, having this knowledge, this learning that we have. I hope that one day they're not going to suck our knowledge. If the whites, they copied our knowledge, the knowledge that we have of many, many, many years, of lots of more than 10 years ago, today we wouldn't be devastated of our forest. We wouldn't have attacks in the rivers. How is that today? Our people, without any scientific knowledge, we can maintain our land. Where is the land? We have forest. We are in the midst of the indigenous people in the Amazon forest, but we're not respected. We are doctors in this sort of knowledge. I am a doctor of knowledge because I've learned, I acquired knowledge with my people, listening, learning, doing as my grandma did, my great-grandparents, my father did. I acquired this knowledge. I did not go to school in the school of the white to look for knowledge. I looked for the knowledge here with the people. And I'm very thankful to God, to Ichon, that is God, because he gives me this knowledge because I am who I am because of God, and I can share this knowledge with you talking about Amazon, talking about the resistance, because I am the resistance. I am the resistance together with my people, and I will keep on doing that. I will keep on fighting, struggling to have a good life, to be healthy and valuing our products. I keep on fighting with sustainable goods, trying to find partnerships to offer the best for my people, but I'm not able to do that because I do not have resources. Sibrai was calling me, what are you missing? What do you need? You are no longer breaking the nuts. Why is that so? It's because my machine is old. I cannot do this job anymore. And also electricity, because we don't have good energy anymore. We are running a project. I have proposals to MPS to build clean power for my land. That's be a clean energy that does not affect our environment. Where are the healthy partners to help us? Why? What is happening? The people, the society breathes around us. They should value us.
Today I cannot work properly because I don't have an electric supply. So all the projects that we want to develop cannot advance because I do not have the support and the sustainability provided by the state. I depend on capitalism. And that has invaded our indigenous society, and we cannot live without capitalist structures. We are still standing, and I want to value the work of my community. I work with Copaiba, Andiroba oils. We sell fish, we sell acai fruit, but I do not have any support. And look how much I have struggled, showing my struggle in documentaries and speaking about it. But our administration of the state, they really cannot see what we do. And this push that comes from the fact that you are here listening to us, and by the fact we are doing something sustainable, that helps us to show this company that we can stand on our own feet with the resources of our community. We do not depend on the companies, but we need you as partners. We need the universities as partners. We need the federal agencies. We need institutions. We need the indigenous organizations. We need that the indigenous people who are now in power, we need them to help us so that that power can be ours too. I hope I have contributed, and I did not talk much about our history because I thought that Rosane did talk enough about that. But we are a people suffering from many economic initiatives, the dams, the railroads, and other companies that are now, well, now the internet providers are here in our territory trying to sell the access to internet. So there's no justice in Brazil, not even to make the mining company Vale to pay at least for access to internet. We are a people who have been impacted by the dam, but I have to pay for electricity and I don't have supply. So they do not treat us as equals. the Vale do Rio Doce company, they applaud anytime there's conflict within the peoples who live in this territory. We are 28 villages. And many young people play the role of chiefs because they have capitalistic interests, not because of tradition. Now everyone wants to be a chief, but I always say chief, but not anyone can be a chief. You have to be concerned about the territory. You need to have a vision of the future, because the future is now. We are living the future now, and we will leave that as a heritage to the next generations. Today, I am very concerned. Like Lula's administration, I am in a hurry because I have to build leadership, and I have to show the indigenous people what should we be concerned about. There's no need of exploiting our land, of mining for gold. We do not need the companies mining in our territory. Today we have drones flying over this area, hunting us during the night. What are these drones looking for? They are looking for the wealth of our territory. It's not about us. We are the guardians of the forest, but they are surveilling us because we surveil this territory. Because anytime someone wants to take us out of here, it's going to happen like it happened before with the Tucuruí power plant. We see many landlords killing indigenous leaders. Where's the justice in our country? We are not protected. We do not have security in our lives. And I will go on speaking. I will not be silent because my father taught me not to be afraid. He taught me not to fear, and this is my message. Today is the day of indigenous people. Every day is the day of indigenous people. On the 19th of April, we have here a celebration in Brazil. Now, the 19th of April became the day of the army, of the military. Oh, it can be for them, but for us, every day is the Indigenous Peoples' Day, and we celebrate it as we have always celebrated. Thank you very much from my heart for listening. Thank you, Maísa. Thank you, the professors. I have tried to share a little bit of my vision. Thank you very much, truly.
Thank you very much, Katia. You let us understand the reality in Brazil, and also it is very significant. We have this webinar about indigenous struggle this week. It is because long years ago, in 1522 of April, the Portuguese Pedro Cabral led the first expedition to reach what is now known as Brazil. And it is often said that this expedition discovered the land that is now Brazil. However, from the indigenous perspective, it's the history of massacre of indigenous people, and also the long history of struggle began that day. So, and according to the official figures, the indigenous population in Brazil is about 800,000, representing only 0.26% of the total population of the country. So we should understand more and fight together with the indigenous people. And now we would like to introduce two professors, Professor Fernandes and Michel Lotti. He holds a degree in agronomic engineering from the University of Sao Paulo. He has a master's degree in development Planning, emphasis on development economics from the Center for Higher Amazonian Studies of the Federal University of Pará. He has a doctorate degree in urban and regional planning at the Institute of Research and Urban and Regional Planning, Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, with a sandwich at the Latin American Observatory of Geopolitics of Institute of Economic Research, the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Currently, he is an associate professor at the Federal University of South and Southeast Pará, working at the Institute of Agrarian and Regional Development Studies and the graduate program in Planning and Urban and Regional Development in the Amazon. He is one of the authors of the book Amazon Horizons to Rethink Brazil and the World, which is published by Rosa Luxemburg and Expressão Popular in 2021. Yeah, I think I also introduced Professor Bruno Majero because they wrote the books together and prepare the PowerPoints together. So I also introduced Professor Bruno Majero. He is professor at the Federal University of the South and Southeast of Pará, Maraba campus. He holds a degree in geography from the Federal University of Pará, a master degree in development planning from the Center for Higher Amazon Studies, and a PhD in geography from the Fernandes Federal University. He is coordinator of the Laboratory of Studies in Territory, Interculturality, and Re-existence in the Amazon. He has research experience in the following topics: geography of the Amazon, geohistory of the Amazon, territorial conflicts in the Amazon, geography of major development projects, discourse and production of space, a grand question in the Amazon, field education, and geography and the colonial thought. He is author of several articles in specialized magazines and one of the authors of the book Amazon Horizons to Rethink Brazil and the World, which is published by Rosa Luxemburg and Expressão Popular in 2021. He is also co-screenwriter of the film Stepping Softly on the Earth in 2022, which is produced by Amazon Latitude Films. I typed the books and the documentary details in the chat room for your reference. So please, Professor Fernandes and Bruno, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation to participate. Me and Bruno, we have organized to share this presentation, share the time, which we hope can complement the important contributions of Rosane and of Kasika Kacha, who makes a very strong statement from her perspective of analysis of the problems and the challenges we have for building indigenous protagonism in the future of Brazil, of the Amazon, and of the world. So after this greeting, I don't know, maybe Bruno wants to greet you first to start, and then I will start with the first part of the presentation, and then he will make the second part of the presentation. Bruno, would you like to greet us? I'd like to thank the opportunity of talking here together with Kacha. It's always an honor to be with you, with Fernando and Rosane. Let's hope we can deepen the debate on the Amazon region. And so Fernando will start and I will be doing the final part of the presentation. So I will start by thanking you as I did, but also I would like to congratulate the organizers of the South-South Dialogue, because we understand it's a very relevant initiative to establish dialogue across university groups and indigenous people to face the challenges of the global south. I would like to thank particularly Professor Jade and Maisa, a PhD candidate, who have organized and who contacted us. And I am Fernando Michelotti. I teach at a university located in the Amazonian region, the Federal University of the South and Southeast of Pará, in a place called Marabá. And my studies explore all the topics around Amazon, but all my studies are developed in deep dialogue with indigenous people and peasant people in the region, recognizing the importance of their struggle presented by both Katia and Rosani, and believing in the role the universities can play in terms of broadening the dialogue between indigenous peoples and the academia. And the ideas I will present here have as a reference, as the main reference, the book we have organized together. And we have a presentation that I hope to share with you here. One moment, please. Just tell me if you can see the screen, can you? As others have said before me, the book that myself, Bruno, and another colleague, Carlos Walter Porto Gonçalves, have published, it has this title, Amazonian Horizons, to Rethink Brazil and the World. This reflection of ours has some principles organizing our ideas, and I believe it's important to mention them because they are in dialogue with what the two indigenous leaders we have heard presented. So one of the main principles of our analysis is understanding that it is important to build deep critics of capitalism as bringing death and problems for the originary indigenous people. But our criticism has to be built together with an understanding of the coloniality that goes along with it. Not only we have a colonial origin in the Brazilian or Latin America history, it's not only about an origin, but also the deep roots of this origin in the way that problems present themselves today. So we understand that all expansion of capital, all capitalist expansion, means the invasion of territories. So capitalist expansion has this element of exploitation, of plundering, of territorial domination, of violence and destruction. The third principle is that this process of domination needs to produce an other that is considered to be inferior and then becomes invisible and silenced, as Rosani said. And that makes so that these people becoming protagonists of their own struggle is a challenge. And ourselves from the universities, we must reverse our perspective to be able to contribute to the recognition of this other who has always been a victim of invisibilization and silencing. So the universities have a lot to contribute with a new vision, able to reverse how these people were erased from historical register. And finally, to see that the Amazon region is not only a territory, it's not only about land and environment, but fundamentally people that are offering alternatives and future for the world. And that's what we try to reflect in the title of the book. And now just to talk about again this challenge, because we're talking with an audience that that is from another part of the world, very far from here, and we may be asking ourselves, how close can you be to the history of the territorial historical formation of Brazil? So we would like to highlight a few processes that are in dialogue with the first speakers over what they said, and also to highlight some elements of our history to the people that may not know the Brazilian reality.
To bring this world map that are watching us today to understand what is going on and what is the Brazilian position about that, it's important to emphasize that this colonial origin that formed Brazilian national state, the representation in the map indicates how the Constitution of Brazil as a state is very strongly marked by the European colonialism that after their expeditions invaded Brazilian territory, not only in a direct process of European invasion in that territory, it was not an empty place, but it was said before, there were lots of people, indigenous people that occupied these different spaces that marked deeply to expropriate people. So people that could be labor in the exploitation of this new territory. One of the marks of this colonial process was the slavery of people through compulsory work, very violent, people that met each other, of this movement of imprisoning people from Africa that were brought for this new territory for slavery in this new territory. There are deep marks, because deep marks in this population, as it was said by Kadia and Rosangela, Rosalie, sorry, it was marked by the slavery of people that came from Africa, as well as people that lived in this territory already, exploited by their work. In addition of the slavery, because of these deep marks that will mark as a coloniality, it is part of our society that had the independence of Brazil in the 19th century could have been a political moment to end the colonization. the end of this coloniality that persists crossing our social formation. If slavery and exploitation is something very important that took place in Brazil, in our study, we call a war against the people. Their objective is not to make this invasion effective, but to maintain a constant exploitation of the people. We separated these images here. It's an ethnography of the beginning of the colonial period in Brazil. That there was a very important anthropologist, João Pachoco de Oliveira. He talked about the prospect of violence against the Brazilian people, how this cartography recognized it since the starting point of the colonization, very much occupied. This picture here shows how Brazil was before. Doesn't mean that they acknowledge that was occupied, but a land that should be conquered. But when they decided to conquer, they decided to have a war against the people to somehow exploit them under this idea of colonization. In our book, we show that Brazilian people, they were formed since that time. They have this burden of colonialism. It's a permanent war against the indigenous people, and also because of their territories. The previous talks show who is going through this permanent war. In this process of capitalistic expansion and territorial war against the people, there are some marks, not only I would say scars in the Brazilian population, because one of them, that's what we call the destruction of the nature that has this deforestation process. These two pictures will show us how it was the forest coverage in the Brazilian territory in the beginning of the colonization and how it looks today. You can observe here very easily two areas with forest. One is here by the ocean, suffered a very strong impact during the colonization. Comparing with the current status, it is less than 25% of forest coverage. But the other part, in the tropical forest, is at the northeast of Brazil, that is exactly the area of the Amazon forest. For those that are not aware of the Brazilian land, it's important to know about the regions that we are drawing your attention to, emphasizing that because of the invasion of the Amazon invasion, there were lots of violence against the people, and the indigenous people, they have a different characteristic because it took long to promote the destruction of the forest. Therefore, the movement to destroy the Amazon forest started a little bit later, in the mid of the 20th century, showing these highlights of the destruction of the forests in the southeast region, but at the same time that they show that in the context, Amazon forest is the deepest world concern and becoming a border, a place of resources, but also an area of constant concern for those that work in the environmental segment. Amazon if you look at it globally, is one of the areas in the world that has lots of tropical forests. And it's very much important. Besides, it has become, besides having ecological mechanisms for the planet, it also has the attention of the global players. As it was said before, Amazon, we should not only think about Brazil. Here at the bottom part indicates that involves not only Brazil, but also other countries in South America, Peru, Bolivia, Venezuela, Colombia, and Guyana that participate of this Latin American dimension, that express the difficulties that the importance of this area for the world, but actually the Brazilian occupation, they also show difficulties for the Amazon region and also for the indigenous people. All these colored areas here, there are different units that are recognized by the Brazilian state as aimed at environmental conservation and also where indigenous people are living, for example, including peasants. Drawing the attention of the Amazon importance is not given not only because we are important for the world of preservation, but also non-dissociated by the indigenous presence and also the presence of peasants that live there. That's the reason why that we would like to say the Amazon forest has a lot to show to the world, not only because of the global concern with its preservation, but above all, because it has lots of people's struggles, traditional learnings, that has a lot of things to teach us as a forest, as a nature of this size. And what Rosani and Katya have said show what is taking place here. That's very important to acknowledge the importance of the forest, not only locally, but also globally, of Brazilian forests. There are two questions for your attention. One of them, how Amazon in the 21st centuries, how it's still part of the continuity of the war to the peoples. That's given in our reflection because the choice that Brazilian government made or the Brazilian society made, because they export commodities. We want to explore a bit longer what is happening in the Brazilian 21st century. Is still caught by this culture of exporting commodities and also this continuous war to the peoples. But we want to replace, to have a different look, not only because of its destruction that the forest undergoes, but also thinking the Amazon as the center of the world and how we can have relevant questions to think about our paradigms in the future. That's what is proposed in our conversation. I'm going to think further in this first item here, and Bruno will discuss the second aspect here. For our discussion, I want to think about this historic process, how it's maintained, but after new determinations, how important it is commodities exports has in this process. We cannot dissociate this importance from the commodities exports, how it impacts the Chinese demand, for example, for these commodities. That's a key element for our discussion. Why, for sure, the 21st century brings this growth for the world, economic growth for China, creating a demand of raw materials, power, electricity, and other raw materials. And Brazil somehow is very much connected to that. Not only Brazil, but at Latin America, some authors, they establish as a key point in the development of the countries in Latin America in the beginning of the 21st century as a commodities consensus, bringing this strong idea that every government, even the most advanced ones, somehow they are caught by this support or by this foundation of this export of commodities, and this somehow prevents the development of our cities. In Brazil, along the 20th century, we went through this industrialization process, even if it's concentrated in some regions, but somehow it was diverted, what we call a loss of importance of the industrial production and replacement more and more of the dependence of commodities export, both ore, agricultural commodities, of mainly this support for the Brazilian economy. Because of that, some regions suffer, such as the Amazon area. And that's an area that is suffering, that is being sacrificed because they might be part of a logic of a destruction of its people on behalf of the maintenance of economic development of the country. That's a process that we want to draw your attention and how it impacts the people that live there, because they are destroying its territory, the violence, because we are also losing possibilities of thinking differently. These graphs that I'm presenting to you now, they reflect the export in the 90s, in the end of 90s, comparing to the current period. They both highlight important aspects. First of all, the graph on the left show how the Brazilian exports have grown in millions of dollars. It clearly shows how the 21st century, 2003 and 2, we adjust our economy trying to leverage their exports, our exports. But on the right, it shows that this total growth in exports, it's given, but there was a lower quality of the products. The blue line, for example, shows that in the beginning of the 21st century, a great part of that we lose importance. And on the other side, basic products, these raw materials, directly extracted from our lands without going through any industrial transformation, such as ore, meat, or other products, they are the key players in this process. This 21st century shows how important the export became, but the quality of the product somehow they lower a lot. In 2019, the last year of this historic series, this share had this configuration. Soybeans, for example, they represent 22% of the total of exports. Oil, 20%, ores, 19%. Grains, for example, such as corn, 6%. Soy, oil, raw oil, corn, and meat, they represent 75% of Brazilian exports of the primary goods in the year of 2019. They reflect somehow what is happening now. It reinforces how products such as oil, raw ore, grains, and meat, they are responsible for this commodities boom in the Brazilian economy. The other pictures here, they will show importance that China has had in this scenario. The lower part of this graph, we have the 4 main destinations of the Brazilian exports, and also it shows that in the year of 2000, China represented roughly 2% of these exports, and then in 2021, it represents 30% of the Brazilian export, being much more important of what happened, for example, in terms of export to United States and European Union.
So these numbers are specifically about iron export. This shows how much the exploitation of commodities in Brazil has a global flow, and the importance of that flow in terms of export to China, that grows in terms of importance over time. And what we want to emphasize is that this connection of the demand for commodities, it has its impact in Brazil, but it also allows, that's the most powerful parts of the Brazilian society, transform this choice for commodities into a project of continuation of coloniality and war against the peoples. Here we can see information comparing the 4 or 5 main crops for agriculture in Brazil. So the first 3 are at the base of our food pyramid: rice, beans, and yucca. We see here there was a decrease of the area dedicated for this type of crop. That means a decrease in terms of our food security, and that has been replaced by corn. That becomes also a crop for exportation, and mostly it has been replaced by soy. That has been replacing most of the food crops in Brazil. So Cacique Katia was very precise to point out food as an important aspect for the survival of indigenous people. And this shows how much in Brazil we have been abandoning the production of food and replacing it by crops that are dedicated to exportation. Here we see also the importance of 3 important commodities: soy, represented by the red dots on a map; mining, here represented by the yellow dots; and cattle, which we see in this area that they're painted in gray. If we add all those commodities, we will see that the expansion of this type of production goes along with the historical flow of advancing, moving further the productive borders of Brazil, and increases the destruction of forests and traditional territories. So along with the growth of this type of economy comes what we call a metabolic fracture of the functioning of nature. So here we have seen in yellow the loss of Atlantic forest along the coast of Brazil. Now we also see that yellow area growing in the Amazon region. We have more visibility in this case around fires. Fires are a great expression of what we call the metabolic fracture. And in the larger image, we see how much the areas that are being impacted by fires, these areas are connected to the railways and the roads built in the region. It's also, the fires are also connected by the installation of hydropower plants. This is energy that's being produced for the extraction of commodities, and Katia has talked about how much the construction of a dam in the Amazon region means that the people there were expelled from their land. And finally, the expansion of fires, the growth of these fires is connected to the implementation of structures for the exportation of beef. All these elements have been gaining visibility internationally for the environmental impact that they have. But the environmental impact is only one part of the violence against the peoples of the Amazon region, peasants, indigenous people. In the red areas, we see the deforestation areas since the beginning of last century. And the circles in different sizes, they represent the number of murders of people in the region who were victims of this conflict. So each one of these circles represent a number of people who have been murdered in the process of invasion of the territories and the destruction of the forest. The images on the left show one of the tragic moments of violence against peasants and indigenous people in the invasion of these territories, most precisely in the region of El Dorado de Carajás, where 21 peasants were killed on the 17th of April of 1996. So this is also a date when we celebrate the resistance of the peoples of the Amazon. We see many demonstrations in Brazil to bring them back to our memory the sacrifice of these people. And it became the International Day for Peasant Struggle. And the 19th of April has also been reclaimed by the indigenous movement for demonstrations in favor of their rights. So this is a very important moment for us also to be debating these questions. And the historical process of colonization and persistent coloniality, the impact of this for the people also triggers a struggle from these people, not only to resist, but to promote alternatives for the future. And Bruno will now talk about more elements of what I'm calling resistance and also alternatives that social struggles are generating. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Fernando. And I believe that the first question we must bear in mind is that we are talking about the Amazonian region. And we're talking about a living system, which is the land. And this living system has its own metabolism. Metabolism that will be altered by any dynamics of excessive consumption in any part of the country. In any part of the country, we can generate the exploitation in another part of the planet. So the growth of urbanization of urban areas in Asia, in China, in the United States, and the demand for primary goods that is absurd, it's being generated and it's been increased immensely over the last 10 years of the 21st century. For us to we must have an idea of the proportion of this demand. For the Amazon region, that means sacrifice because it implies the expropriation of Kachia's territory by a mining company that needs to export iron, which will be the base for the construction of urban structures somewhere in Asia. So the dynamics of the capitalist expansion, the choices made by our elites to exploit commodities as the only possible path for development implies the exploitation of the peoples, because we must turn common goods into commodities. We must transform indigenous land into farms. We must transform traditional territory into a soy crop. So when we say we have to reverse our view, and in the book we call this a war, because the indigenous people say we are still at war. And this war against the peoples is not taking place just anywhere. It's taking place in the Amazon. One of the most important places for the sustainability of the life in the planet. This metabolism is fundamental for the planetary system to be alive. So the risk is it's not only Katia that is at risk, or Fernando, or myself. We are all at risk before this dynamic. So anytime we talk about the Amazon, we are talking about responsibility, because it's the center of the world, because of the nature, but also because of the peoples. This image is the mine of Carajás, the mining plant of Carajás in the territory of Cacique Cacha. It's one of the major mining plants of the world. It's not any type of exploitation. This company exploiting this place over the past 23 years, since the beginning of the 21st century, they have expropriated 1 billion tons of iron, and they plan to do much more. So the pace of exploitation is insane. Sorry to use that word. It is not sustainable for life. So the metabolism of mining, of the mining business, of the soy business, is a metabolism of that. And I believe that was clear when Katia spoke and when Rosani spoke. So please, let's move to the next slide. So for us to be able to reverse our point of view and our references, we have always thought of Brazil as having these blank areas. And here we see that the colored areas, indigenous land, Quilombo land, settlement, these communities are holding the forest together. So the provocation we like to propose is, why is Brazil not being built from the knowledge of these communities that are holding together this territory that is fundamental for the integrity of the life in the planet? And we thought of very important information to share here, and it's on our book. It's important to say that the Amazon is not a forest. Forests are not merely forests. Forests are made of knowledge. Without the knowledge of the peoples, no forests will be still existing. If we think of a geological time frame of 18,000 years, we will see that the Amazon, after the glaciation, the Amazon was a savanna. When the ice melts, we see the formation of the area of the now well-known tropical forest. But we must say to you that peoples have been living in the Colombian Amazon region over the past 19,000 years. In Monte Alegre, 11,200 years, 8,600 years in the Serra dos Carajás, the place where we saw that the massacre took place. And there are other examples. So this occupation, these populations have been occupying this land in a manner that they were integrated to the forest. We must know the Amazon is a creation of the Amazonian people. The management by these ancestors formed the Amazon. And we have some elements to show that. Here we see different planted or cultivated forests. As Katia mentioned, the base of the sustenance of their villages is the collection of nuts. And this nut field, this nut trees, they were planted by their ancestors. They built their lives around this cultivation of the forest. The forest has been planted by traditional populations. A good part of the Amazon soil is what we call the black soil, terra preta, very fertile soil. And we have other types of production here, cocoa, guarana. So this diversity of plants is also very important in terms of the diversity of food. And another thing that is very important in the Amazon is that 1 hectare of forest can produce from 30 to 34 tons of biomass per year without anyone touching it. The forest by itself can produce up to 34 tons of biomass. This is life. This is freedom. This has always been the freedom, mental freedom of the indigenous people. For the forest has been the horizon of their emancipation. They didn't need to be trapped into contracts with the white people because they had the forest as their freedom, producing their autonomy. And it's been produced in this territory for more than 19,000 years now. When we say that the Amazon is important for the planet, we mean that this territory must be thought having as a reference the knowledge of the people who have built it. So, being in university, we must build a critical vision of the production of universality, and we must know that the knowledge of destruction are those becoming universal. For example, engineering for an indigenous people may mean destruction, expulsion from the land, and suffering, as Kacha's stories tell us. So what has been universalized are the knowledge of destruction, the knowledges of destruction. But the knowledges of life that are being guarded by these people now must be universalized because they have universal global implications, not only science. And that's why we need to reconnect to our ancestral knowledge. That's what Ailton Krenak, an important indigenous leader in Brazil, says. He says that the future is ancestral. That means we need to reconnect to the history that has built the Amazon. And what is the ethical position regarding this knowledge? Our book is an invitation to the listening of these people. We must listen. And in terms of an ethical perspective around ancestral knowledge, I would like to invite us to imagine with them and not against them. And that may seem weird for the audience, but humanity is not restricted to human beings. There is humanity in other beings. There is humanity in the forests, in the rivers, and the relation between these beings must be reciprocal, must be one of respect and not of domination, as the Western society has always championed. I want to give an example of a friend called a Colombian called José Quintero, and he defined the dignity of his people in 3 terms. We have emerged from the world. Everyone has a making, he says, and the making of a bee is as important as the making of a human being. And finally, everything must be cut and shared because we are not completed beings. We are not complete. And if we do not build communities, we cannot survive in the world. In their language, in the Anu language, there's no word for being, and simply there's a word for making. In the Tupi language, there's no verbal tense. In the Zhe language, the meaning of greatness is ancestrality. In the language of the Awete Sheenga, almost every word ends with tawa, that means home. So almost everything is understood as a home for us. So these people are providing us with other ways of thinking the world, with the diversity. And these are the peoples who have built the Amazonian region.
The concern is with ecology, with diversity, biodiversity. It's important to keep this ethnic diversity, otherwise there won't be ecological diversity. And here we are going to wrap up showing that these people, they do have horizon, not only for Brazil, but for the world. Their practices they have a political and theoretical agenda for ourselves. That's an idea of Professor Porto Gonçalves that has written the book with us. The Western country or the left parties, they're part of the French Revolution. Think about equality, liberty. In the 90s, there is a march in the Amazon, 2 different marches that followed from Amazon to the capital of the planned Amazonic countries. There were something written. It was territory, life, and dignity. These words, they are very clear in the demand of the people, but it makes us think in different horizons for ourselves. Territory means that without the guarantee of the territories, people Kataji, for example, they will disappear. Life in a full understanding of that is human life, but it's not only human life, it's a dignity as a manner to be able to live being different. These horizons that are seen make us wonder if we do not have different political horizons to move on. These indigenous land demarcations, for example, show that do not expect any longer for the state. They do that themselves. We have to create legal aspects, legal framework to help them. They are considered mononational, but we're talking about more than 100,000 people that live there. Just in Bolivia, Latin America, we have to acknowledge our condition as a plurinational state. We have to start thinking about the idea of development. We're tired about listening to that, and people are talking about alternatives to the development. These fronts that Fernando has said about soybeans, cattle, iron, they masculinize the space of that. They're masculine because workers are masculine, the fronts are masculine. Indigenous women, they show a completely different way of reducing the space, being careful, not destroying the spaces. We have to think about human rights, but also how they are part of some constitutions of Latin American countries and the rights to the nature. Without a landscape, there is no life. A mountain sometimes is fundamental for the existence, and they are the vital energy for those people. Nature has rights, not only human beings should have the right. So we have to having a manner to go out of this rationality. We always think about life when we think about buying, and the indigenous people communities show that we have to think differently, live in economy and go into life. Maybe I have spoken too much, but I'm inviting you guys for this reflection. It's not me, Carlos, and Fernando that are talking about that. That's the ancestrality that is talking about that. They indicate other manners to live beyond the destruction of the land or the commodities or how to cross the land. These learnings, they should be the core of the life of the planet, so we can keep living and using these ancestry beliefs. Thank you, Maisa. Thank you very much for having me. And we're here for the next part of these discussions.
Thank you very much, Katia, Bruno, and Fernando. And now we have the sections of question and answers. And I would like to invite Professor Rogerio from UFIS to ask any questions and comments. Thank you, Rogerio.
Good morning for those that are here in Brazil. Good evening for those that are on the other side of the world in China. It's great to know that our public now is more than 1,000 people in the social networks in China. I am Professor Rogerio. I work in the University of Espírito Santo, and I have a partnership with my Chinese colleagues in the universities of China, and also this movement of rebuilding these universities. I'd like to congratulate everybody for the presentation, great presentation. I'm going to start saying that I'd like to say that I'm talking from Vitória in the state of Espírito Santo, that I'm more than 3,000 kilometers far from you. So from the previous talks, just for you to have a feeling how Brazil is big and how this country is not known for even for those who live in this country. We are somehow, I would say a word, that we were able to watch the video of Rosani, the talks of Katia, that deeply touched me, having the presentation of Fernando and Bruno, and I believe that they showed the dimension of how Brazil is not known in its character, in its ancestry, and also this plurinational that we have, the density of the country, and how these knowings should be acknowledged when we strive for new alternatives. Therefore, my points here, my highlights here, they are just about the prospect for the future. I'd like to start with Katia, asking her, what are your expectations when you think about Lula's government? It's fact that it opens another quality, another possibility of discussion to bring more aspects to the talk of Rosani. But this government has lots of interest, surrounding it. For Fernando and Bruno, I also will ask them two things, but I'm going to ask for the two of you together. First of all, I really enjoyed the presentation. You had a plethora of data, also visually was very good, because it has this part of the movement that has taken place in Brazil. Therefore, I would like to talk about the visit of Brazil the Brazilian president that went to China. It seems to me that it's very strategic for both countries. We are getting closer or coming closer to China because of the previous government didn't have much contact. My question for you, Bruno, you have wrote about very important data. This very fast growth of the Chinese participation as a destination of Brazilian exports because of ore that we exported, iron ore mainly. We are strategic for the Chinese growth. Their growth average between 1979 and 2010, I think it was 10% yearly, maybe a never seen growth in the world capitalism. Becoming closer or getting closer to China somehow will somehow help Brazil to be a key player in the global economy. Brazil is a country, when you talk about public accounts, we depend on commodities export. We are going through an open process, maybe the launch is low industrialization in the world, we, in terms of growth, we depend a lot of the commodities, much more than before. If we think that getting closer to China might be the growth of commodities export, we will go to the contrary path. If we think about what Bruno has said, this system has produced a break in the development of Amazon, and also the interaction of man with nature, because the culture of indigenous people, man and nature, they are very much connected today. So if we go in this path, we will have lots of difficulties to think about different paradigms besides the technique, the technology. We do need, in fact, that in terms of world geopolitics, we are very much characterized by lots of instability. But what I'd like to ask, if becoming closer to China, if there is a strengthening of a model that somehow bring about this what Fernando's called about exfoliation of the countries. I'd like again to congratulate for your presentations. They were great, even for us from Brazil. Lots of information, and send you a warm hug and ask my colleagues and send warm regards for those that are in China and other countries that are around the world that are listening to us.
We also have a guest from Victor, right? Please, Victor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Karunan. I'm from India. I'm an anthropologist. I specialize in the study of indigenous peoples in Asia. Thanks to Katia, Fernando, Bruno, and others for your excellent presentation. It really helped us to understand the situation there in Brazil, and particularly the struggles of the indigenous peoples, which resonates very much with the struggles of indigenous peoples in many countries in South and Southeast Asia. I have two questions. The first is about indigenous knowledge and wisdom. Now, Katia, Fernando, and so on touched upon the wealth of knowledge and wisdom that indigenous peoples have had for so many generations. And my question is, how are we documenting that? How are we preserving indigenous knowledge and wisdom? I'm an academic, so I'm throwing the question to Fernando and Bruno. How are we as academics, students, researchers, and so on, helping indigenous peoples to document their local wisdom, their knowledge, and their worldviews? Because as you said, it's very important that that local knowledge, wisdom is mainstreamed within academic discourse as well as in international discussions about climate change and about many other global topics that we are confronting today. That's my first question. My second question is to Katia. Katia, I think you talked about it, which is that we have a big challenge in terms of how to transmit this knowledge and the experience of elders to young people. And this is a challenge we also face among indigenous peoples in South and Southeast Asia, where many young people are either being assimilated within the capitalist system, are being recruited to be part of the new technology, internet, and the new world, so to speak, and are leaving the forests, are leaving the villages, are going down to the cities. Yeah. What are we doing in terms of facilitating the intergenerational dialogue between elders like you and other elders in indigenous communities and young people? And we have some experience here in Thailand where we're trying to use Gramsci's concept of organic intellectuals and trying to build organic intellectuals among indigenous youth, among young people, and facilitate the dialogue between indigenous elders and young people, and to facilitate as a process by which young people can then become future leaders of the indigenous peoples movement. So those are my two questions, but thanks to all of you for an excellent presentation today. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we invite the speakers to respond those questions first. So Katia, maybe you are the first.
Yes, I will ask we went to the question from the professor about what do I expect from Lula's administration. I will say that how we found ourselves in the former administration, a racist administration against indigenous people. I saw the people lost, looking for something. All the people, not only indigenous people. I saw despair. So the Lula administration now comes to calm us down and giving opportunity to indigenous people to occupy spaces of power. I hope that these people who are not these indigenous people who are now in power are there not only to stay seated on their chairs. I hope they have the role of giving an opportunity for the indigenous peoples to show their knowledge, to show their experience, to show their knowing of the exchange we have with the forest, green, pharmacy, food, healthy food. We hope that this is an opportunity for the food that is grown by indigenous hands to get to the tables and households in the cities, food that is grown without poison. We want to show that the indigenous peoples have knowledge, an ancestral knowledge. And we used to think that people would die only from old age. But today we know that people die from the pollution of food itself, and young people are dying, and the generations are changing. So what we expect from the Lula administration is an opportunity for us to show our knowledge or wisdom. And us, the indigenous peoples, want to be entrepreneurs, working with wisdom, keeping the forest as we have always kept over hundreds and thousands of years. This is the continuity we want to show. We want to show the society that we are nations and that we have capacity. Around the question of how we will bring young people along with us. We want the indigenous youth to keep resisting, to know the identity of their peoples, not to forget their culture, to study without losing the idea of protecting their territories, protecting the forest, but they must be allowed to get education, to study, and use that to broaden the knowledge of their community, to broaden the indigenous knowledge from the ancestral, together with new technology and the knowledge from the whites. Because internet is already a reality here, we must use the internet to serve our research and the deepening of our knowledge. And I believe, I trust we will know how to do that. That's why I want to stress that young people, young indigenous people, they do not have to work as slaves as we did, but now they will be the bosses. Now in my village, for example, we have a laboratory for livestock. I want my son to be the owners of these businesses. I want this to be multiplied. I want that to serve as an example to other indigenous peoples in other countries. Indigenous themselves were raising vacas now, or I don't know, bringing their fish from their knowledge. This is my thinking. Indigenous people must be prepared as geologists, anthropologists, historians, engineers, indigenous engineers. We need indigenous people to have their degree so we can be entrepreneurs of healthy food. And what we have learned from our ancestors will be kept in continuity with the Amazonian forest. The Amazon was also lost in despair, and I hope that President Lula is not only talking. I expect that he has the ability to listen to us, and we want to be connected with him because we also know that we are here only for a while. Someday we will depart as the president will, but he is showing that he is something who is he is someone who is listening to us. He recognizes our cause. He's listening to our demands. And let's hope that after Lula, another president will come, and they will be someone who will be able to listen to what we say, who will say no to the dams, who will put a stop to mining, who will listen that we do not want our territory fragmented. Here we cannot just sit back and watch the wood being taken from the forest, the gold being taken away, the mining trucks taking our products away from Brazil and being sold very cheap. We want to be valued. We want our products, our history to be valued. We want to be valued as leaders. And we want everyone to know that there are laws against killing leaders. That's what we expect from the new president. We need him to put an end to this, to the exploitation of our territories, to the killing of our indigenous people, to the lack of recognition of our knowledge. We don't want to be exposed anymore. We want to be able to join the protective umbrella of the state. We want to be living history. We are living history. This is my answer to the professors and to everyone who is listening to us. We want to be heard. Hey, stop. We are here, and I want to speak, and I want to be heard. I want my voice to cross the world, to get to everyone who's listening. We are a people. We exist. We resist. Let's join hands across countries. Let's speak frankly. Let's put an end to prejudice and racism. But let's start from ourselves, from the inside. Because putting an end to racism and prejudice is needed. We need to take each other's hands, even if we do not speak the same language, but we need respect. Respect had ended, but now we can rebuild it. Here we are sharing the same pain. We are being able to understand each other, even if we speak different languages. I hope this speech can be kept in your heart. Thank you for the opportunity. This is my vision. From my heart, as I speak. Let's help each other. Let's respect each other. If you respect me, I will respect you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katia. Before I invite Bruno and Fernando, I would like to read a Victor Hugo question because he has a question for Bruno. In Ecuador, we have the same challenge as in Brazil to build a plurinational state and an intercultural society. And this is already in the constitution of the Republic. But the main challenge is to assess the government to apply it in the social and economic public policies. What is the alternative process to the neoliberal policy proposed by Lula government? So please, Fernando and Bruno. Yeah, it's your turn.
I will start trying to interact with the questions and then Bruno will jump in. So first, I would like to thank you for your question. They're not simply questions, but questions that topics that were raised for us to further advance our dialogue. All of them are really important. Professor Rogério, thank you for your comments. And I see that you are bringing to the table a very key question to this very important group between China and Brazil around the question of how the relations between China and Brazil, political and economic relations, could point to a different direction. I believe that's a fundamental question and a very complex one, not only in the context of Brazil and China, but also in the global context we find ourselves in. We have a reflection in our book that we are presenting. Well, the book was written still during the Bolsonaro administration, so we do not analyze the moment, this moment of transition, the contemporary moment of the victory of Lula. And what we see is that there is a connection between the choice for commodity as the main structure of the economy and the political authoritarian presence of the Bolsonaro government. We see a great difference between the Bolsonaro administration and Lula's administration, but in terms of authoritarian features, there is a connection. There's a structural connection between those two administrations, because the choice for commodities as our main economic solution, it will bring us almost automatically to authoritarian policy, because commodities need the exploitation of territories, and that will bring in the destruction of the forest. So this is a structural problem across Brazilian history, over Brazilian history, but also in the very recent history, because the centrality of commodities implies authoritarian policies. It's impossible to go on exporting commodities at this scale without the exploitation of the territories as we have seen. So the message is, if we want to put an end to destruction, we must escape the commodities consensus. We cannot trust that the solution for the Brazilian development is the continuous expansion of soy, monoculture, and cattle raising, because it doesn't matter how much the administration wants to recognize the importance of the indigenous people, there will always be an economic pressure for a new cycle of authoritarian policy. So this would be your diagnosis. So in this context, we must say that if the present administration wants to recognize the rights of indigenous people and preserve the Amazon forest, they have to take a different path for the economy of the country. And we need to break free from having in the world the position of exporters of commodities. And our relation to China is fundamental for that, because it's our connection to China that is able to point to some other direction. I'm not a specialist in international relations, but there's a very important topic here. The economic interests who support our relation with China as the importers of our commodities, they're very powerful. They have their place in the executive and legislative powers. They have an important place in the communications that are supporting this trend in the Brazilian economy. So our capacity of organizing and resisting politically, not only together with indigenous peoples, but also across society as workers, as peasants, well, it depends that we have in the international spaces groups that are concerned with what we are discussing here. So we need dialogue across civil society and across this type of group to put on the table a different way of building relations between countries, ways that are not based solely on exports and imports of commodities. Because of the impact we see that this has in terms of metabolic and social fractures and conflicts that we are seeing. So we need an alliance between those of us who are trying to find another possible world. So it's not only about China and Brazil being together, but what path these relations will take. How can these relations not be captured by corporate interests? So this is something that Katia has said very well. The Brazilian government, the Brazilian administration of Lula has to be listening to the indigenous peoples, and these voices must be present in the bilateral negotiation. The indigenous people have the right to have their say about the economic decisions that are being taken, and we have here the opportunity of building knowledge and building dialogue around these matters. Around the question of our colleague Victor, there are two things I would like to highlight here regarding how the very important knowledge of the indigenous peoples is being documented and how the universities are playing their role here. In the Brazilian universities, the anthropological studies are very developed in terms of this kind of documentation. But what's really new here from the 1990s on is the protagonism of the very subjects of their knowledge, of this knowledge, in terms of organizing this documentation and the sharing of this knowledge with other parts of society. I believe Rosane had something to say about that. She would have something to say about that if she was here, because she's an indigenous anthropologist. She's an indigenous woman who knows, who has access to this knowledge because of her own ancestrality, and as Katia said, she learned from her father. But Rosane was also trained as an anthropologist, and she's someone who can some way mix this academic point of view with someone with a perspective of someone who owns the indigenous knowledge herself. So this movement of protagonism from the indigenous people in Brazil also goes through themselves appropriating tools from academic research and arts and the production of film with their own eyes, from their own perspective.
So you can keep on going. And also to finalize, I'd like to say that university has helped somehow to these indigenous people, peasants, to have more access to universities, not because of the university, but how to mirror the struggle of these people. Universities should design mechanisms so we can enable, maybe guarantee, ensure a greater access of indigenous people, peasants, as students, as well as researchers, professors, teachers, recognizing this historic wisdom that they have to build more access, not only guarantee their access to university, but this university know that they should have this different cultures, not only open the world to the indigenous people to enter, to study in the university format, their thinking, denying their previous knowledge. If the university opens more to these people in their universities, it's part of this struggle. And I think that's how we non-indigenous university can somehow help in this process. Thank you, Fernando, for your questions. I'm going to try to be brief. First of all, Fernando has already talked about some important aspects, but discussing about commodities, authoritarianism, I'm going to write a book about the geography of Bolsonarism, that is the former Brazilian president. When you talk about mining, cattle, corn, sugarcane, plantation, all of these commodities is a way of thinking about the world. Also, music from the country music, other practices or cultures in Brazil I have mapped what happened to Brazil and also where he were mostly voted, and the difference of votation of Brazil, expansion of mining, expansion of the music, harvesting, agribusiness, and other aspects of the economy with the expansion of his growth or more rotation. We're choosing a model of society. We are choosing a way of eating, basically meat. We are choosing on how we want to dress up, where we're going to eat. In Brazil today, the street fairs that had food from indigenous people, peasant food, has lots of network that are selling their products. They sell poisoned food to us. The choice for commodities, they go through this not only governmental, political, economic choice, but it goes through our way of living. And it somehow it floods with the authoritarianism. And before Bolsonaro, we had few shooting clubs. Now we had many. I don't know if you got to know that. That's a place where people learn how to shoot. That's a university of death and full death. We've got to understand that there is this correlation. I agree with Fernando. Relation with China is important, even if in the very first moment, Lula's government movement, he acknowledged the collective practices that they are in the decision-making process. After 4 years of so much disgrace, it was so big in terms of symbols, it was so important. That's where we should build this new fiscal framework in Brazil. And then I think how maybe to charge more taxes of the rich people, but these businesses that we are talking about, they are viable economically only and because governments are offering some sort of tax incentives. If we cut all the investment in Amazon, we have to think about how that is going to impact the future. When you talk about fiscal framework, we should think about that the money that enters because of that, that money is built with public money in its entirety. How the subjects are able to get the money, to get the investment, to build the structure. The state, federal state, is responsible for that. Either we change that because of the civil society pressure on them, as Katia said, the use of the spaces for the transformation of the society. We need a great shift. Otherwise, you're going to be in this idea of cattle, iron ore, and also commodities. There is not a nickel movement, for example, soybeans or export and also commodities. What we have to think about that, to rebuild the industry of oil transformation. That's a very important movement, but we don't see the same thing happening to cattle in agribusiness, and that they go through and cross Brazilian territories, as Dona Anacleta used to say. That's a lady that lived, it's a quilombola that talked about this great, this corridors of exports. We have to think about that. Every road that is built cuts our territory. Victor's question, João Victor and Victor, he talks about the plurinationality in Brazil and alternatives that we have. There is not a concrete movement. I haven't seen anything in Lula's government, in the Brazilian legislation, to create this plurinationality. There is an indigenous movement to build that up, but it's not an institutional movement. I know the reality of the countries in which there was this institutionalization in the country, but in fact, there are not many changes in public changes if we do not change the offering more autonomy for these nations. The teaching that Katya brings up is that maybe the alternative of these neoliberal movements is building up the autonomy, not depend on the state. That's a teaching that was Zapatism movement built in Chile, that is building ethics principles. The ethic aspects, for example, for laws, studies, so we are creating autonomies, just as Katya said. You talk very well about that, how we can create autonomy. Maybe that's the core word, to build alternatives. It's not that we say that we have to put pressure on that, but we do not have to make the people dependent on them, but to be autonomous. That's a challenge that we face right now. And the question of Victor about the universities, Fernando has already, I am a teacher, Victor. We have lots of peasants, quilombolas, Black people, indigenous people, all the diversity that you can imagine. We do have a pedagogical dynamic that is very different. We consider the differences in time and space. These are places for our education. It shows that we have to produce knowledge. What we observe, that's what Fernando has said. Not only having quilombola or indigenous people for universities, if we don't acknowledge their diversity, epistemological aspects that they have. And so in thinking in this direction, we have to build their more protagonism in their society. Katya always asked for an indigenous university. We have some examples in Venezuela, other countries, but we need their habits, healing, eating. We do not have the subjects in the universities that are great experiences, but we have to build language experiences, not only in terms of poetry, but also in the movies. I'm just about to shoot a movie. Katya and we are characters in this movie that show what happens with the people Cartagena. There was a short part of this movie. That's an instrument that we have, an instrument of inclusion to showcase the voices. All of the indigenous people talk, and we are able to somehow to put all that together. So I'd like to thank you again. I don't know if I have answered your questions, but it's always a great pleasure to be here. Your voices, the voices of Amazon, to have a place of speaking, so important for us. It's important for our geopolitical, just as China, the places from where you talk to, they interfere in our reality. And I hope that our voices are part in the action, in the voices expression, and also how we think about the universities to be partners, to be closer, or any movement to be closer that you might think about.
Thank you very much. And now it's almost midnight in Beijing. And actually we have already over 1,700 viewers. So thank you very much for your excellent presentation.